Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Raymond Yeung. Here are tonight's top stories. Xi Jinping hails the one country, two systems principle on his arrival in Hong Kong. New COVID cases in the city climbed to more than 2,300. And Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is sworn in as President of the Philippines. Hong Kong has rolled out the red carpet for President Xi Jinping, who is visiting the city to mark the 25th anniversary of the handover. In a speech on his arrival this afternoon, Xi said Hong Kong has overcome challenges and risen from the ashes. Yeung reports.
It's the first time in almost 900 days that President Xi Jinping has left the mainland, and the Hong Kong government made sure it was worth the trip. As his high-speed rail train pulled into West Kowloon Station just after 2 p.m., people welcomed him with flags. Chief Executive Carrie Lam, her husband Lam Siu Po, and Liaison Office Director Luo Huining greeted Xi and his wife Peng Liyuan when they emerged from their carriage. All wore masks and there were no handshakes. Others strained and stretched to catch a glimpse. The president walked past lion dancers, bright red and yellow banners with patriotic slogans, former and future chief executives, government officials, and the Legislative Council president. In his speech, Xi said the entire nation would be celebrating the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover. For the past 5 years, I have constantly been paying attention to and caring about Hong Kong, he said, emphasizing unity between Beijing and the SAR. Xi did not mention the anti-government protests 3 years ago, but he did say the SAR went through a number of challenges and has now emerged from the storm and risen from the ashes. This shows the strong vitality of one country, two systems. The first couple then went their separate ways. Xi and his entourage crossed the harbor to the Convention and Exhibition Center, where he met political and business leaders. Peng, meanwhile, toured the Xichu Center in West Kowloon's cultural district. Wang, HKIBC.
President Xi is expected to be in Hong Kong for 2 days with the fully packed schedule, which includes the inauguration tomorrow of John Lee as Chief Executive Carrie Lam's successor. Details of Xi's itinerary have been kept secret, but his motorcade was seen making a stop at a science park in Sha Tin. Most offices and restaurants there had been asked to close. Lam hosted Xi and Peng for dinner at Government House tonight. Core mainland officials, including the director of the State Council's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Sha Baolong, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Ding Xueshang, are accompanying Xi on this trip. 8 public health experts say designated quarantine facilities for tourists should be built if the government wants to stick to a zero-COVID policy. The specialists found that during a 21-month period, only 20 people contracted the virus while in hotel quarantine. Isaac Lee reports.
People flying into Hong Kong have to spend 7 days in hotel quarantine as part of the city's anti-COVID measures. But with most countries reopening their borders fully, there are questions whether hotel quarantine is necessary and effective. 8 public health experts who researched transmission risks during hotel isolation analyzed the genome sequence of 720 COVID cases identified during hotel quarantine between May 2020 and January this year. But only 20 people in 8 clusters were found to have contracted the virus during their stay in hotels. Previously, only 3 clusters had been recognized as hotel transmissions. The University of Hong Kong team said hotels were not designed for infection control, so the virus could spread. They suggested building designated quarantine facilities for tourists if the authorities want to continue their dynamic zero strategy. However, the experts thought that the benefits of inbound quarantine is becoming incremental and increasingly limited due to the high vaccination uptake and the natural immunity formed by the 5th COVID wave. Epidemiologist Ben Cowling even proposed cancelling both home and hotel quarantine requirements. He said on Twitter that there's no longer a rationale for the measure, since infections are already here. Asakli, HKIBC.
New COVID cases in Hong Kong stayed above 2,000 for the second straight day. Of the 2,358 infections, 162 were imported. The virus also claimed the lives of 2 elderly people. Health officials said another 28 patients were infected with Omicron subvariants BA.4 or BA.5. The source of transmission of 9 of them is unknown, raising fears of silent carriers in the community. Overseas, the new president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr, has vowed to get things done as he took his oath of office. But many Filipinos are disgruntled with the new leader and swarmed the streets of Manila to protest. Sarah Wong reports.
The motorcade of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. rode into the National Museum of Fine Arts in Manila as a new era dawned on the Philippines. The 64-year-old son and namesake of a former authoritarian leader won the presidency with more than 31 million votes last month. That was twice as many ballots as its nearest rival and was the biggest electorate mandate in Philippine history.
You, the people, have spoken, and it is resounding. I believe that if we but focus on the work at hand and the work that will come to hand, we will go very far under my watch.
The U.S.-educated former senator praised his late father's rule. He urged his compatriots not to dwell on the past, but to look forward. His running mate Sara Duterte, also the daughter of his predecessor, was sworn in as vice president. Not everyone greeted the new government with flowers and applause. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Manila to protest.
The next administration will be an alliance of maybe the worst tyrants in Philippine history that we can only, I guess, brace ourselves against the worst.
For the next 6 years, Marcos Jr. is tasked with reviving the Philippine economy and tackling inequality. He will also be navigating the geopolitical complexities with ally the United States and neighboring China. Sarah Wong, HKIBC.
The head of NATO has accused China of military expansion as the Western Defense Alliance huddled in Madrid in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We see a deepening strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing. And China's growing assertiveness and its coercive policies have consequences for the security of allies and our partners. China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan.
In response, China's ambassador to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, accused NATO of widening conflicts by targeting Beijing and expanding its membership. NATO has officially invited Finland and Sweden to join the bloc after securing Turkey's approval. Russian leader Vladimir Putin vowed to respond should NATO deploy troops and weapons in Sweden and neighboring Finland. U.S. singer R. Kelly has been sentenced to 30 years in prison for subjecting young fans to sexual abuse.
I think that I faced with backlash. It just feels good to know that he's off the streets.
The 55-year-old singer was convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking last year. Victims accused Kelly of using his celebrity status to sexually and physically abuse them. Kelly, who has vowed to appeal, faces another trial in August on child pornography charges. Retail sales last month slipped 1.7% from May last year to $29.1 billion. This was in sharp contrast to an 11.7% surge in April. Sales of vehicles and motor parts plunged the most, losing nearly 32%. Supermarkets and department stores also reported weaker sales. And while luxury goods saw an increase, growth in purchases were half that of April. The retail sector is not expecting a huge boost during the summer, although the government will start handing out the second round of consumption vouchers in August.
According to our experience last year, we see that at the beginning of the disbursement of e-voucher, there will be a big jump in the sales performance, but there will be a week-by-week decline. We expect that the overall performance brought by the e-voucher will be quite mild, talking about just single-digit increment versus last year.
Now let's take a look at the markets. The Hang Seng ended the day down by 137 points. To the top 10 active stocks, Tencent shed $10.60, Meituan was down $8.60, while Alibaba was down $2.60. The Tracker Fund was down 10 cents, but China Construction Bank was up 5 cents. To the forex trading against the Hong Kong dollar, the euro's at 8.15, the pound sterling at 9.49, and the Australian dollar at 5.39. Over in Europe, the London FTSE is currently down by 146 points. Factory and services activity on the mainland has moved into expansion mode for the first time since February, after shaking off a COVID-induced slump. The official non-manufacturing purchasing managers index jumped to 54.7 this month, recording its fastest rebound in more than a year. The retail and transport sectors that were hard hit by lockdowns led the revival. Factories were busier, although growth remained weak. The manufacturing PMI ended 3 months of decline and rose to 50.2. On to the weather now. The number 1 standby signal remains in force, but will be replaced by the strong wind signal number 3 before midnight, as Tropical Storm Chaba edges towards the coast of western Guangdong. More showers and thunderstorms tomorrow, with temperatures between 26 and 29 degrees. The rainy weather will continue over the weekend. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for Thursday night. Join us for more news at 11. I'm Raymond Yeung. Good night.